Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Hi. Wait. Okay, you didn't see that. Welcome to the Kaveh pre-release. I wasn't sure if I was gonna do a Kaveh pre-release. I thought about it, and honestly, I think I should. It's probably gonna end up being a bit shorter because I don't think there's all that much to say. But I know that a lot of people are interested in him. So first things first, let's look at his base stats. 12k HP, 234 base attack, 751 base defense. 96 EM, and as we'll see, there's a decent portion of his kit that's based around EM. However, as we'll discuss, it's not that great. So let's get into that. Yeah. Talents. Ascension 1 passive. When damage dealt by a Dendro Core hits Kaveh, including Burgeon and Hyper Bloom. For those of you who didn't know, Hyper Bloom can hit your character. It has a very, very small AoE. If you're standing really close to the enemy, you can take damage, but usually it's not that big of a deal, but anyways, that's why Hyper Bloom is mentioned. Kaveh will gain HP equal to 300% of his Elemental Mastery. This effect can be triggered once every 0.5 seconds. Let's try to put that in context. The usual amount of EM that you can reach, that most people can reach, is like around 1k from like artifacts plus EM weapon, and then maybe more from external buffs. So let's say like 1100 is pretty reachable if you're building character full EM. Your EM multiplier will be, and then that means that your Hyper Bloom damage, so pre-resistances, this is the damage, and the damage that you'll take is this divided by 20. So about between 1.5 and 2k self-damage every time you trigger a Bloom reaction, right? Assuming that you get 2 per 0.5 seconds, which is the upper limit, if Kaveh were also to have 1100 EM, then he would be able to take 2 of them. So even in the Inversion and Hyper Bloom teams, if you are to max out the self-damage that you can take, if your Kaveh has the same amount of EM as your character that's built for EM, it will be enough for him to self-sustain up to the upper limit of Bloom, Hyper Bloom, Burgeon self-damage that you can do to yourself. All this to say, with this, you can always, at the very least, mitigate all of your self-damage on himself. The problem with that is that it's only on himself. Usually, when you play teams that do Bloom self-damage, either Nilou Bloom teams or Burgeon teams, you're not getting all of your reactions when only one character is on field, right? You're getting your reactions to happen when different characters are on field. And so because of that, your other characters will also take damage from your blooms. But he can't heal those. You might still find yourself in situations where you need a healer. But the thing is, if you have a healer, then this doesn't really matter that much. You have a healer, you don't need him to be healing himself anyways. So basically, this looks really good, like at first glance. But when you think about it, you realize that, yeah, it will help for comfort a lot, of course, but for most people, it won't actually be enough for him to be like the only form of healing that you have on your team. It is still going to help you a lot with survivability, of course, if you end up on-fielding him, because it does, at the very least, basically negate your self-bloom damage, and realistically, you're not actually reaching the limit of 2 per 0.5 seconds, so it's somewhat likely that you heal more than you take damage, again, if you're building him fully EM. A good way to think about this is basically, it makes it so that if you play a team that has Bloom self-damage, Kaveh is kind of immune to it. That's a good way to think about it. And he can even use it to heal a little bit. Ascension 4. During Painted Dome, which is his burst, we'll get into that later. After normal charge and plunge attacks hit opponents, his EM will increase by 25 up to 4 times. So he gains 100 EM, basically, during his burst, which is just a nice little upside. All right, let's get into his kit properly now. Normal attack uses, I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that, Merak. That's his suitcase. He hits people with a suitcase. The animation looks fucking hilarious, and it's by far the best part of his kit. It's so cool. Anyways, to perform up to 4 consecutive attacks. Not too slow, but not particularly fast either. Charge attack drains stamina over time to perform continuous slashes. At the end of the sequence, performs a more powerful slash. But this also uses the fucking suitcase. His normal and charge attack animations look really cool. I really like them. They just look really cool. His plunge attack, he actually uses his claymore or something, but he takes it one-handed, and then he hurts his hand. It's so funny, like his normal attack talent animations have had more effort put into them than all of Daya's kit. E, Artistic Ingenuity. Uses the suitcase's mapping ability for offensive purposes, initiating a radial scan that deals AoE Dendro damage. It will also scan all Dendro cores in its AoE and cause them to immediately burst. So here's the thing about this, right? At first glance, you see this and you're like, oh, that's cool. That's a nice little upside to his E, right? Here's the thing. As we'll talk about a little bit more later, he will work, but isn't the greatest in Nilou teams, and non-Nilou Bloom teams with him will not be the greatest. And if you play him in teams other than that, if you play him in Hyper Bloom or Burgeon teams, causing the cores to immediately burst is a downside, because it means that you'll get the normal Bloom damage instead of the Hyper Bloom or Burgeon damage that you want to get. Again, we'll get into his possible teams a little bit later, but just keep in mind, that's not always an upside. The skill damage itself is like, sure, whatever. Q, Painted Dome, completely unleashes the suitcase's energy and creates a cubic scan space, dealing AoE dendro damage to all opponents within it, causing all dendro cores in its AoE to immediately burst. This doesn't make dendro cores immediately burst for the whole duration of the burst, it's just when you cast it. And granting Kaveh the following enhanced combat abilities for a specific duration. Increases Kaveh's normal charge and plunge attack AoE, and converts his his attack damage to dendro damage that cannot be overridden. So it's a dendro infusion. That also increases the AoE for his attacks. And all dendro cores created by your own party members through Bloom reactions will deal additional damage when they burst, and increases Kaveh's resistance to interruption. These effects will be cancelled once Kaveh leaves the field. It lasts for 12 seconds, 20-second cooldown, 80 energy cost. So, here's the thing. Bloom teams, like outside of Nilou, right? Bloom teams, like non-bountiful Bloom teams, suck. They are not very good. They're even more niche than the Nilou teams are, because effectively they're as niche, but they're less good, which means that when they're not in their niche, they'll perform even worse. That's without Kaveh. Now, with Kaveh, the reality is it's not enough to fix that. It is possible that future characters will come out, future Hydro or maybe Cryo characters that work well for Fridge or stuff like that, will come out eventually to make Bloom teams better, but you just don't have enough. Right, this has a 6-second cooldown and you get it once from your burst as well, so that's like 4 times per rotation that you can insta-pop your seeds at most. Which is like, it's useful, I guess, but it's not even that big of a deal, honestly. And the reality is, while dendro cores taking a while to burst is definitely a thing that makes Bloom teams worse, it's not their only problem. They still just have the issue that, like, in order for the Blooms to deal a lot of damage, you need to build your characters full EM, and if all of your characters are built for full EM, and all you're getting out of that is some Blooms, that's just not really gonna be enough damage, most of the time. It can function, but unless you're in situations with, like, AoE enemies where Bloom is really good, like where pseudo-quadratic scaling will be really good, it's just not gonna be a good team. And even when you are in situations like that, it won't be the best team. Which honestly kind of saddens me. Like, basically what they did, they make the cores do 46.7, no, about 50% more damage, right? But it's not actually 50% multiplicatively, it's 50% additively. Going back to this, it doesn't make them go from 20k to 30k. It just adds 50% to this. So it makes them go from 22k to 23k. It is more damage, it is nice, but it's incredibly minor when your characters are built full EM, right? And hey, maybe that information is wrong. Maybe I was lied to and it is multiplicative. If that's the case, maybe he might not be fucking garbage in these teams. But like, assuming that's not the case, you know, not the greatest. And what else does he provide to these teams? Well, he doesn't take damage from the dendro cores basically by healing through it. And he himself gains 25 EM, but usually in those Bloom teams, you want your dendro to be your aura, not your trigger, so this 25 EM doesn't do anything for the Bloom damage. All in all, his kit is made for Bloom, but it isn't good enough to make Bloom go from a reaction that's honestly kind of a joke when played by itself to an actual good team. If we had the right tools around him so that Bloom would be fine to begin with, and again, right, this is without Nilou. I'll get to Nilou in a second. If you did have that, then maybe he would be good, but you don't. Right now, Bloom is outside of Nilou, like, it's a joke. So, what about Nilou teams? Well, in Nilou teams, this is even less valuable because you're still getting the same amount of increase, but your base Bloom damage is higher because you're also getting an increase from Nilou herself. So the actual, like, percentage gain is lower. On top of that, with Nilou, your cores already basically explode instantly. So there's no real upside to this. So effectively, this is so marginal that it's basically a joke, and this doesn't have the upside that it usually has. So what are you left with? Well, you're left with a character that has a dendro infusion and has self-healing, but no party healing, so you'll probably still need a healer. How good is that dendro infusion? Well, it's actually decent. Like, it's not bad. The AoE that he gains when using his burst is actually pretty okay. Like, it's nice to have. The main thing is that there's just generally going to be better options, right? If you play him as solo dendro in a Nilou team, then that means that while his burst is down, which is 8 seconds in your rotations, you're not generating any seeds, which means that basically your team sucks. right? You're losing a lot of damage. And if you're using him in double Dendro, then it's harder to slot in a healer, right? Because you could use Yao Yao, but then Yao Yao wants to be on field and to use her burst, which like conflicts with his like field time requirements. So likely like you're gonna end up playing him with Nahida plus like Kokomi maybe. But then at that point, right, if you use a Hydro unit that is not a healer, he won't die, but the rest of your team will. And if you use him with a Hydro unit that is a healer, then his self-healing doesn't matter that much, and you'd be better off going for a unit that has more rotational flexibility, or just more things that they do at a baseline, like a Hytham having higher personal damage and better Dendro application. So you'd rather do something like Nilou, Nahida, a Hytham, Kokomi, than Nilou, Nahida, Kaveh, Kokomi. He'll still be fine, he'll still work in the slot, but just, like, is he offering a new thing to the Nilou team? Not really. I don't believe that he does. If you can get away without needing a healer aside from him, which, like, if you play your rotations perfectly, you might be able to do, then his value becomes a lot higher, right? He becomes just a pretty nice driver to have on your team. He still fits with your team's flexibility and rotations, but, you know, at least he's got, like, nice AoE Dendro application, and that's useful. But I think that, like, generally when people play Nilou Bloom, they don't want to have to fucking worry about every member of their party dying if you sneeze on them. So what does that leave him with? Well, that leaves him as a potential driver for Hyper Bloom or Burgeon teams. And unironically, despite his anti-synergy with Hyper Bloom and Burgeon teams, because he basically steals your Hyper Blooms and your Burgeons, I think that's probably the best place to use him. Like, you can use him in Nilou teams, and he'll be fine, but I think he'll be just as fine in just like Hyper Bloom teams as a driver, right? Because basically, you can think of him as like budget all Hytham, basically, right? That's kind of a good way to think about him, where he's not really going to be doing much damage, but he can be a Dendro driver to let you do Hyper Bloom stuff, which is nice. His AoE on his charge attack, his normal and charge attacks, like I said earlier, right, is actually pretty large, to the point where he can be a nice form if you don't have Nahida of like AoE Dendro application, on top of being a possible like driver for Dendro teams with like Xingto, Kuki plus whatever. He will work fine there. Nothing crazy, but like he'll function. You can do the same thing in Burgeon, although I don't think he works quite as well in Burgeon, because generally the Hydro units that are good at applying Hydro and AoE in Burgeon teams need to be on field to do it well, right? Because when you're playing Burgeon, most Hydro units off-field application is one unit, and when you trigger burning on an enemy, one unit of Hydro does not create a bloom. It just vaporizes the burning away. So you need to apply Hydro twice in a row in order to actually get a seed to be generated, which means that you'll need your Hydro to be faster than your Pyro application, which often can be a bit of a problem. You can get around that by using Animo as a way to weaken the Burning Aura, or Electro, or Cryo, or even Geo if you want. But because the like Hydro units that have good AoE application, which is where Burgeon is usually good, because those units are generally units that want to spend time on field, and he doesn't have off-field Dendro application, I don't know if the synergy is really there yet. Could eventually be made to work better with a future Hydro unit, but as of now, I'm a little bit iffy on that. It'll still be fine, like you can still make it work, of course, but there will definitely be some potential issues and some potential obstacles that you'll have to work around. You can also like try him in Quicken teams. The main thing is like his burst doesn't deal damage. Like, it deals damage when you cast it, but it doesn't deal damage after that. And his skill is not like a thing that hits multiple times, which means that his only real source of Dendro application is like one burst, up to 3 skills per rotation, and then his normal attacks. He doesn't have a bunch of additional Dendro application to get a way more Quickens like Alhaitham does, right? Alhaitham, his E, when it's like at 3 stacks, is 2 Dendro apps alternating, 2 and 1. Otherwise, it's 1 Dendro app. But also, he's a sword user, which means that his attacks are faster, which means that at a baseline, he also applies a little bit more Dendro. All in all, will he function in Quicken? Yeah, like he can, but would I expect him to like be really good in Quicken? No, I don't think he has any particular synergy with Quicken that makes him all that good there. But you can use him there if you really want to. The saddest thing about Kaveh is that he doesn't fucking have any teams with Alhaitham. Like, come on, man, really? Because they're both units that are pretty field time intensive, so like, you don't really want to play them together, which is like, man, really? Come on. Why you gotta be like that? But yeah, all in all, at the end of the day, right, he is a functional Dendro driver. He will work in Nilou teams, he will work in Burgeon teams, he will work in Hyperbloom teams. And Dendro has this very cool ability of basically being able to clear the content no matter how bad the characters are, because the floor for the reactions is just so high. So as long as you have a decent amount of elemental application, you can make something work by using the right supports around, right? Like, you can make this work by using Singto Raiden or Singto Kuki, right? I could go into, like, ER requirements and all that, but I don't think there's much of a point right now, because he's just not a unit that you play for his damage, really. So just go Fav and don't worry about it. Yeah, we can look at the Constellations. Okay, Sublime Salutations. Within 3 seconds after using Burst, his Dendro resistance and incoming healing bonus will be increased by 50% and 25% respectively. So it makes him even better at tanking his own blooms, I guess. This doesn't actually matter. It doesn't really matter that much, because you should be able to self-sustain your bloom damage without this anyways. C2, normal attack speed increased by 15% during burst. Gonna help his application a little bit, probably. Won't matter too much. Increase the level of burst. A little bit more bloom damage if you play him with Nilou, I guess. But like, it's 8%. That's not much. C4, Dendro cores creating from bloom reactions Kaveh triggers will deal 60% more damage when they burst. This is also likely to not be multiplicative, so it's a nice little damage boost, but it doesn't like increase it by 60%. I mean, unless this applies to hyper blooms and burgeons, which I don't think it does. I might be wrong though. Like, if it does, then it's better than I give it credit for. But if it just applies to like the rupture damage, right, like the bloom damage itself, this doesn't make that much of a difference, because in bloom teams, like I said earlier, generally you want your hydro units to be the triggers, not your Dendro units. So like, you'll get some of it, but generally you won't get too much. Treasures of, I don't know. Increased level of skill. That's also, like, it doesn't do that much. It's just a little bit more damage on it, but the damage on it isn't all that high to begin with, so you're probably not really building for it. And finally, C6. Normal charge and plunge attacks hit during Painted Dome. They will unleash whatever, dealing 61, which is not a lot, percent of his attack as AoE Dendro damage, and, which is the part that actually matters, causing all Dendro cores within that AoE to burst up to once every 3 seconds, right? So instead of just having the effect on his E every 6 seconds, and on his burst initial cast every 20 seconds, so 4 per rotation, he gets another, like, up to 5 maybe, depending on when exactly, like, the timers start. Like, you could get at times 0, 3, 6, 9, 12, if things line up really, really well. Probably more like 4 over your burst duration, which doubles the amount of, like, instant blooms that you can make. But like I said earlier, just getting your blooms to trigger instantly isn't enough to pull bloom from just pretty trash all around to an actually good team. You can make it function, but it's not going to be great. And this is actually a pretty big nerf to his ability as like a Hyperbloom driver or a Burgeon driver. So unironically, this might be a Constellation that you don't want to activate if you get it, because it improves his intended role, I guess. But his intended role is such a bad role that even if you improve it, it's still not really better than his unintended role as a Hyperbloom driver. But yeah, so like, all in all, I've been very negative on him. I want to make it clear, I don't think he's bad, right? Like I said, Dendro has a really high floor, and by virtue of being Dendro, he's the kind of unit that, like, if you really like him, you can play him. I'm still not sure if I'll go for him. Honestly, it's going to depend on what banner he ends up being on, which, I mean, we'll know by the time this video comes out, but we don't know as of recording it. But if I do get him, I will build him, because I think that his animations look really cool, and I think that his playstyle, like, actually looks fun. But I also really do think that, like, if you want to build him, if you want to play him, you're better off just playing him as a Hyperbloom driver. Hopefully that changes eventually with future unit releases. I really, really do hope it changes, because I think that things like this are really cool, right? I often talk about how much I don't like Nilou's design, but it's not because I don't like the idea of, like, changing the reaction. I think that changing a reaction with a character's kit is really cool. What I don't like about Nilou's kit is that I feel like the restriction of her passive is just not working when you have a non-Hydro or Dendro unit on the team. It feels like it was put there because they wanted to sell more units. But the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I think it's really cool to have more characters that offer new ways of interacting with reactions. It's just, I don't think Kaveh does enough for it to be good. And if it's not good, then it's just gonna feel bad to play, because you'll be clearing slower just because you want to try a new thing. And it's nice to have, it's better to have that than to not have that, I think. But also, I wish it wasn't bad. I wish it was a little bit better than I expect it to be. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it ends up being good, but I'm not too optimistic. I do think that the kit is a really cool design, though. This is one of my favorite designs in a while. The idea of having a character be able to trigger your bloom seeds at a specific moment, which means that if you actually play them outside of Nilou teams, right? You can pretty consistently make it so that your Bloom self-damage mostly, if not only, happens when he's on field, because you can control when the Bloom explosions happen to some extent. And giving that character like that healing when they take Bloom damage, that's fucking sick. That's incredibly cool. I love that. Like, that's such a natural progression of if he does this one thing, what's another thing that would work well with in a kit like that? That's really cool. That's smart. That's really good design, I think. The problem is those just baseline Bloom teams fucking suck. So you probably just play him in Nilou teams, and in Nilou teams, this passive doesn't do what it does outside of Nilou teams, right? Because in Nilou teams, the Blooms explode basically instantly, which means that you'll take some Bloom damage on characters other than him. But like, that being said, his kit is really, really cool. I really like his kit, and I hope they keep making characters with kits as interesting as this, but I just don't think that it offers enough, right? Like, if this was multiplicative, it could. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I was lied to. Maybe it is multiplicative, in which case, he's probably still not going to be very good, but like, there's going to be an upside to him. There's going to be a real reason to go for him. But I don't expect it to be in, like, it's just not enough, right? If it's not multiplicative, he just doesn't offer enough in the same way that Nilou does, right? Nilou, like, the parts that I don't like aside, Nilou takes an archetype that's pretty fucking shit, right? Bloom, and she hard buffs it, right? It's not a 46% increase, it's like up to 400. Without key, it's more like 300 maybe, but like, that's a lot fucking more. And she does a lot of other things. She makes the Blooms have much larger AoE, all that, right? Nilou actually like has enough in passives to take that archetype that's pretty bad and make it good. But because you're starting from an archetype that's pretty bad, you are going to need a lot of passives to make it good, and Kaveh just doesn't have that, unfortunately. Let's do the usual, like, weapon stuff. Weapons, just play Fav. Like, honestly, just please play Fav. None of the 5 stars are actually really good for him. I mean, this isn't completely useless, it helps his healing, but like I said, it's pretty likely that he won't be the one to trigger most of your Bloom reactions. You won't get great ownership of Blooms, so I don't expect it to be all that great anyways. This might actually be better, because you can actually give your EM buff to your character that does get the Bloom damage, or the Hyper Bloom damage if you play him as a Hyper Bloom driver. So Forest Regalia is like your free-to-play option, and this is like the first character that actually works well with this. I'd probably still run Fav over that in most teams, but at least it's fine. Aquamarine, bonus attack, doesn't do that much. The Inazuma craftable, skill damage, ER, it's a little bit more than the Forest Regalia, but Forest Regalia's passive is so much better. You do also get some like flat energy regen, which if your ER Rex are like really high, if you play him in solo Dendro, you might want, but because his damage is honestly not that great, sacrificing damage for ER by like going ER stance and stuff like that isn't that big of a sacrifice. It's not that much of a downside. You don't get hurt too much by it. And so because of that, getting a lot of ER from your weapon just doesn't matter that much, because you can just build it in your artifacts because you're not doing that much damage anyways. So I'd generally probably recommend Forest Regalia with more ER in your artifacts than the Katsuragi Kiri Nagamasa with a more damage focused build. Serpent Spine, if you play him in Quicken, I guess it's fine, but I generally would not play him in Quicken. Rain Slasher, just don't. Right? It's just, you've got better options. Mailed Flower is better for just like pure EM, and you're probably not going to get really good uptime on this passive. But yeah, so all in all, basically Fav and then Forest Regalia. Like, those are your 2 options. And then I guess you could go, if you end up playing him in Quicken, you could go like Beacon or Stone Thresher or Serpent Spine, stuff like that. But I'm not going to include the weapons here because I just don't think that's where he's going to be really good. I don't think he's going to really excel at that. If that's where you want to play him, sure. Go ahead. You probably know which one of your weapons gives them the most damage. Yeah, I guess you could also use Sack. It gives you more like ability to proc the seeds. So if you do play him in an actual like Bloom team, like a Fridge team or something like that, it can be fine there. I guess I should include it. Okay, artifact sets. I mean, it's kind of just Deepwood, right? Like, you can play him in teams where you can have someone else on Deepwood, but generally he'll be the best user for it in the teams where you play him. You can use Gilded, lots of healing, right? It helps your healing. If you are worried about the self-damage, if you play him in teams where he does end up being trigger, so if you play him like in some form of weird Bloom team with an Electro unit that doesn't trigger the seeds like Beto or like Fischl to some extent, where he can actually get some ownership of the seeds, and Gilded is fine, and it helps for the healing. Flop, if it's only like damage that your Bloom seeds do and shit, it's gonna be higher, but it is actually quite a bit less self-healing than Gilded. More damage, less healing in Bloom. And if you play him in Quicken, I'm not sure if you'd want to do normal attacks or charge attacks. I expect normal attacks to be better, but his charge attacks look so funny that that's what I would do. You could play him with as like solo Dendro with 2 Electro units, 1 Animo unit, and play him on TF. Definitely not, but I would. What else? Clam, I guess? Kinda? But like in order to heal a lot, you have to go full EM. Like I guess you need to trigger a lot of blooms for the Clam to actually do anything. It would be funny, probably not very good. Definitely a possible meme build though. Definitely a possible meme build. You could actually potentially max out your Clam procs if everything goes perfectly. It won't, and it won't happen, but you wanna have some fun? Knock yourself out. 4-piece Bloodstained, so that you can charge attack for longer if you kill an enemy, because its charge attack looks really funny, and that's great, that's sick, hell yeah. Alright, Instructor. But even then, it's like fine, because, yeah. Otherwise, I mean, Exile, Gladiator, I guess. Fine for Quicken, I guess, probably. You're probably better off going Gilded though, if you actually do end up playing him in Quicken. I mean, if you play him as a Beyblade, this is 40% normal and charge attack damage. And if you play him with Zhongli, you go, you can do shit. You can do shit. Oh man. No, don't. Yeah, that's kind of it, honestly. I mean, actually, maybe Pavillon is fine. Like if you're gonna be doing the helicopter build, this is probably the best thing to go for over Bolide. Beyblade, but serious. But it's probably not even better than Gilded actually, if you're in Quicken. This is if you're not doing it in Quicken, I guess. Cool, good to know. Nice. Just use Deepwood, okay? Like the actual real thing is just use Deepwood. But like, who am I to stop you from having some fun with 4-piece Ocean Hued Clam Kaveh, huh? Who am I? Okay, artifact stats. It doesn't matter. If you play him as a Hyperbloom driver, unironically, it's probably just attack, Dendro, crit, right? Like it's not like he really does much damage, but as a Hyperbloom driver, you're not really getting a lot of self damage. So going EM for healing like won't do much, and you should be using Fav, so you won't need ER. If you're not using Fav, you might need ER, in which case maybe ER Dendro crit. Probably go triple in EM on Nilou teams. You can do it in Nilou or Burgeon, but in Burgeon you can also just go for this. Kind of just depends on how much self-healing you need. In Burgeon teams, though, actually, if you are like the EM won't do that much for your damage, so it's really only there for your healing. So unironically, you might want to do EM healing bonus. Yeah, he's one of those characters where like, he doesn't really have anything that he does that well, other than like the app being pretty decent. So it kind of doesn't matter how you build him. You can kind of just do whatever. It won't change much, honestly. I don't know, man, just end my life. It's so, oh. Like, it's not, let me make this clear, it's not gonna be good. You're not actually gonna max out your Clam procs, because you're not gonna take Bloom self damage every 0.5 seconds. That's just not happening in game, ever. But like, it's funny. You could have like a mini game where like, how much can you get your Clam to hit for? And have a contest. Like, sure, that would be funny, I guess. Kaveh Clam leaderboards. True. But yeah, I don't really know what else, honestly. Like, this is kind of it. You can also, like, weave in a crit circlet with your EM build if you want to make sure that you proc your Fav and you don't have enough crit in your subs. But you're probably spending a reasonable amount of time on field, so you don't actually need to have that much crit, because you're gonna hit a lot, so you're gonna crit eventually. You do need to have some, like, you don't want to be on 5%, but, like, as long as you're at, like, 25-30%, you should be fine. But more crit is always more reliable. Finally, teams. Hyper Bloom, fine driver. Just normal, straight up Bloom / Fridge. Not very good, but funny. Nilou, fine option. Burgeon, fine option. Quicken, subpar, but functional. Burning, what's wrong with you? Yeah, that's kind of it. Yeah, actually, that's a very good closing statement. You don't play Kaveh because you want him to be good. You play Kaveh because like, it's Kaveh, right? Either with sheesh, baby girl, cool, slay, true, or you think the way he hits people with his suitcase is funny, which I do. And like I said, if I get him, I'm definitely building him, but I'm still not sure if I'm going for him. But yeah, all in all, like, this is pretty cool. That kind of does it. Again, he won't be bad, right? Like, this is not a Deus situation. He's not bad. He's okay. He's not really, like, great anywhere, but he's more than functional, and, like, you can make his teams work. It's not the kind of character that, like, you would build him because he's bad, because, like, wow, funny. like people do with like Xinyan or Amber. Right? Like he's not that level of bad and far from it. He's a pretty solid character, but I would say that he's generally a downgrade to the other available Dendro options in almost, if not every situation. He's an upgrade over other available Dendro options in teams that suck, and he's otherwise generally a downgrade. But you might not have the other available Dendro options, like they might not be available to you. So if that's the case, like he might still find some use on your account. But yeah, how would he compare to Cole? I mean, it depends, right? Do you need a driver? If you need a driver, he'd probably be better. If you already have a driver, then he'd probably be worse. He doesn't do the exactly the same thing. But yeah, that basically does it for the Kaveh pre-release. I hope you learned a thing or two. I hope that was useful for you guys. And yeah, thank you for dropping by. I will see you around YouTube. Cooking level 64. Very cool. Now make baked potatoes with mushroom and onion. Damn, that's cool.